Everyone, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. As ever, Dr. Erin with you.
Dr. Kristen.
And we're here for our season 3 recap of Netflix's juggernaut, The Crown. It shouldn't be a spoiler alert, but a spoiler for the rest of this video, because presumably you're watching this because you've watched all of season 3. Spoiler alert, we're not super happy with this season. So if you loved this season, if you thought there weren't a lot of problems with it, if you don't want to hear a discussion of the things that we thought were problematic, we ask you to find another recap. We wish you all the best.
We're glad you enjoyed it. We're glad you found joy.
And we're happy that you enjoyed it, but this is not the recap for you. It is the recap for you if you want to hear a little bit more of a critical analysis about the character development, the acting choices, the plot devices, themes, and storylines.
Peter Morgan in general.
Peter Morgan as a show creator and writer. We have some
notes. We have some notes for him. Yeah.
We have some notes. So overall, we just started discussing this offline before we started filming. Neither of us really feel like this was a cohesive season. We had critiques of the first 2 seasons, but for myself, I would say by and large, I thought seasons 1 and 2 felt like cohesive seasons. And by that, I mean, there was a set period of time that it covered. There was a set development of characters that happened throughout the episodes. And there was clear themes that were worked on throughout the season. This season had time periods that it was set in, roughly a decade. He's going roughly a decade per season. It had character development, it had plot lines and themes, but for me it wasn't cohesive.
So there's a movement in television right now to do anthology series. So like you see this in American Horror Story, and like Ryan Murphy's obsessed with anthologies.
Like the assassination of Gianni Versace, The People versus O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, American Horror Story, Salem, Clowns, whatever the heck he's doing now.
Yeah.
But there's a craft to that I don't think people really kind of understand the containedness of it. And then there's also a television concept called bottle episodes, where the entire story is contained within the episode and you don't have threads.
Yeah.
So what Peter Morgan did entirely unsuccessfully this season is try to have it both ways.
Yeah.
He tried to have bottle episodes like the Welsh slurry accident. And he tried to do an anthology where they all kind of made sense, but they were still separate from other seasons.
Yeah.
So here's the issue, is that you can do that, but you have to know what your you have to have a dramaturgical point.
Ooh.
And from what I can ascertain, Peter Morgan feels really strongly about a handful of things. One, from this season, he thinks that Elizabeth Windsor is dumb. He thinks that Wallis Simpson was a really good woman for some reason. He also does not seem to believe or want to dwell on the fact that Edward and Wallis were Nazi sympathizers, if not Nazis themselves.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know what to do with Charles.
No.
And he thinks that Dickie Mountbatten was the greatest guy ever.
He feels very strongly that he needs to do something with Charles.
Correct.
But, like, what was it? And I mean that, like, I don't have an answer. Like, really,
yeah.
What was it? From what I saw in the season, the parts of Charles that were most interesting where he was grappling with his relationship with his mother. We didn't get a lot of that, but we got glimpses of it. He's clearly grappling with his own power or lack of power in his family, whether that's true or not. Grappling with like the future and what he's going to do and what kind of leader he's going to be, which is fascinating to me. But then Peter Morgan used David, the Duke of Windsor, as the counterbalance, as the and made this really alarming comparison that they were very similar people in positions and in disposition.
Which considering we have no historical evidence that that's true, that Charles felt that way about his uncle.
That they had a strong relationship. There's no historical evidence of that.
The supposition is at best tone deaf.
Yeah, and I mean,
I mean, like,
he did recognize the Nazi connection in season 2.
We did. We had that whole episode. Like, and then so you just forgot it?
He had that whole episode. It downplayed the severity of it from my recollection, although
it's been a
while since I watched it, because I remember doing our recap of it and doing the research that we usually do about our recaps and being like, oh, it was worse. It was worse than this.
Correct.
But still bad. Still very bad. And Philip's Nazi connections as well. And you know, families are complicated, but like, you're making the show setting to air at the end of 2019. And, you know, we're still grappling with people identifying with Nazis and the idea of white supremacy. And it just seemed really, really badly done to
create.
And to have felt like that episode was fine. Like, right, I dealt with David's Nazi connections. It's fine. Now we can divorce him from that. And like, look at him as a sympathetic character. And I was like,
and again, if we had evidence that Charles felt that way about his uncle, that would be fascinating. Let's delve into how people are complicated.
Yeah.
But for it to be a fictionalized account is confusing as to what, again, I mean, this has just been our mantra this season. Yeah. What is Peter Morgan trying to tell us?
And that, I mean, that brings us to one of our biggest I would say critiques of this season was his use of historical information and his manipulation of it to create stories.
Both in what he left out, in what he created, and in the timelines that he constructed.
So one of the narratives of this season was one of the themes that was touched upon was this idea of age and changing perspectives on life, and we saw that a little bit in the first episode with Elizabeth kind of looking at her 2 portraits, and like she's older and she's in the end, and in the 10th episode she's thinking about her life and her 25 years as monarch and what has she really accomplished. So, and then we get some reflection from Lord Mountbatten as well as he retires from the Navy. We get this entire episode about Philip being obsessed with the moon landing, but he wasn't obsessed with the moon landing. He didn't have, to the best of our knowledge, a midlife crisis. He formed this relationship with the pastor, I'm going to forget his name, that he invites to form this retreat. Bishop? Was he a bishop?
He was a rector.
A rector. But he forms this relationship well before the moon landing. They had a friendship this entire time in real life. This is not the story Peter Morgan told. And they were also so disconnected. So we get Elizabeth dealing with her age in the first episode, the last episode, and whatever episode it was, she was in France with Porchy.
Oh, yeah.
Reflecting about how she always wanted to mind horses. But it wasn't followed throughout the season. Philip's crisis was brought to us in a bottle episode and not followed throughout the season.
And and then we get these, and then there's the Margaret of it all, which
the Margaret of it all.
The Margaret of it all. And so this is the thing, like we can, like some of the performances this season were impeccable. Like Tobias Menzies blew us out of the water. I am not the world's biggest fan of Outlander, I'll say that. And so that was my only exposure of his work before this. And wow, just, I was amazed. He did a great job. I think the kid playing Charles is doing his best with no material.
Josh O'Connor is, I think, a hidden gem.
Erin Doherty is my new...
As Princess Anne, she's superb.
Yeah, and I was afraid that Helena Bonham Carter was going to play Princess Margaret, essentially like Bellatrix Lestrange. And she didn't.
Valid fear.
Always a valid fear. I mean, I think she played exactly the same character that Vanessa Kirby was playing.
Yeah, no,
in seasons
that
1 and 2. That was a really great through line.
There was a lot of continuity between those characters. I think there was continuity between Philip, even though Tobias Menzies far outstripped
Maddie Smith. Yeah.
Bless our wee Matt Smith. I think there was continuity with Matthew Good, and I can't remember the actor's name who played Tony, but I thought there was good continuity there. Lack of continuity we found between Claire Foy and Olivia Colman.
But to do with the writing.
But to do more with the writing and the type of material that Olivia Colman was given.
Yeah.
We both feel strongly that Claire Foy was given a lot more to work with. There was a lot for me of this season where Olivia Colman was sitting there.
Passive. We have a very passive Lizzie, and
like letting her family manipulate relationships, letting Philip have his midlife crisis, seeming passive in situations that I don't believe that she was. Or
especially
if she was, like, show me some exposition as to why she is being passive. Don't just give me Olivia Colman sitting on a couch. It's a waste of Olivia Colman, and it's a waste of my time.
Yeah, Academy Award winner, Olivia Colman.
Hero of my life. I wish we were friends in real life. I think she's a remarkably talented actor. I got glimpses of it this season. For me, this season was a season of glimpses.
Yeah, it just made me want to rewatch Broadchurch.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And
the other thing I want to bring up really briefly is actually, and I want to pay a hat tip to the Extra Hot Great podcast and their discussion of The Crown, is, and on this episode, so Extra Hot Great has been one of my favorite podcasts forever, because these are the people behind Television Without Pity, for anyone who read recaps of TV shows in the aughts. And they are a big proponent of costume dramas. They love them. But the point that they made is that it's almost like that Peter Morgan and Julian Fellows, who created and wrote Downton Abbey, are cut from the same cloth in a lot of ways, but that Julian Fellows understood that he was making a soap opera. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of, I mean, if I had to handle Lord Grantham going through, oh, woe is me, technology is changing the world one more time, I was going to throw a corgi. But like, at least Julian knew what he was making.
Yeah.
Peter wants to make both a prestige drama and a soap opera. Cool. But the best, like the most compelling work that you're writing is soap opera stuff, not a period piece.
To me, it feels like that the show doesn't know what it is.
It has no idea what it is.
Yeah.
And so, like, I felt like he was watching, or he was almost talking to too many different people.
Uh-huh.
This smacks of a show that doesn't have a writer's room to me.
Yeah, we'd have to look back at the episodes and see the writing credits given, but it certainly doesn't read like one where there are editors having a conversation about it. And we will link to the podcast episode for Extra Hot Great in the show notes below, so you guys can find it as well. But I think the final thing, I mean, we could clearly talk about this for a very, very long time.
We've already been talking about it for 3 months.
but the perhaps the biggest critique we have that might be slightly unique to our particular experiences, having lived and worked in Northern Ireland both for 5 years, was the disturbing lack of discussion, inclusion, reference, nod, wink, suggestion during this show that effectively went from 1964 to 1978 of any reference to what was taking place in Northern Ireland. If you have watched any of our episode recaps, you know we talked about it in every episode in which it was relevant, which was most of them. But if you haven't, there was a severe and significant ethno-national conflict in Northern Ireland, roughly violent from 1968 to 1998, which is a long time, kids. That's 30 years. It was the longest occupied presence of the British Army in the history of the British Empire. British troops on the streets of Northern Ireland from 1969 to 2007. and it wasn't talked about. And to have a show that seemingly is at times concerned with disparate parts of the United Kingdom, 2 episodes set in Wales, brief rumblings about Welsh nationalism in the episode about the investiture of Prince Charles as the Prince of Wales. But not nary a reference, except there were 2 references to Ireland that I recall. The Queen mentioned that sometimes she has her horses there, or she gets her horses, something about horses. And a reference in the final episode to potentially a relationship between Edward Heath as Prime Minister and the Ulster Unionist Party, which is the main party in Northern Ireland. And that was it.
So there's a couple, so for anyone who's thinking like these girls are just making a big deal out of nothing, so one of the most infamous acts of the Troubles, which is the shorthand for that ethno-national conflict, happened in the span of this season.
Yep.
There's also the decision to put British troops on the streets of Northern Ireland, specifically Belfast, happened during this season.
Yeah.
And just a heads up, Belfast and London are a 45-minute plane flight between each other.
Mm-hmm.
At this point in time, you have a lot of Irish nationals and Northern Irish nationals living in England. There's a huge movement of migration. There's a lot of economic instability. There's a lot of things that would have come across the Queen's desks during the meetings. And we do have papers, historical references that the Queen knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And had opinions. And we're about to meet now, in the next couple years of this show, we're going to meet Margaret Thatcher, who
is going to be played, as it has been confirmed, by Gillian Anderson.
And she had some real strong opinions about the Troubles.
She was heavily involved in what is considered by many people a humanitarian crisis, where a prolonged hunger strike, a 10-month hunger strike that happened with Republican prisoners in 1981, where 10 men ended up dying from lack of food on this hunger strike before it ended in 1981. A lot of people know about that.
Additionally, sorry, go ahead.
No, presumably it's going to be talked about. And I think you said it was Extra Hot Great that talked about Northern Ireland as well.
They mentioned it, yeah. Unfortunately, they improperly labeled it, but still.
But the point that they made is a point that we made as well, in that presumably things will happen in the next decade. Spoiler alert, Lord Mountbatten is killed by the IRA. If you didn't know that, I'm sorry, it's Google. In 1978, he's a huge character on the show. He's very significant to Elizabeth and Philip and Charles, we have seen. So you would think his death will be talked about, but people watching the show aren't going to have any foreknowledge of why he was considered a target, who the IRA was, what was going on in Northern Ireland that made this happen. He was also killed on the same day of a massive IRA operation at Warrenpoint, where I believe 18 British soldiers were killed by the IRA at a barracks in Warrenpoint on the same day. Really significant events. Presumably Margaret Thatcher will be talked about, the hunger strikes, the bombing of the Conservative Party conference in Brighton in 1984. But we've done no setup work for this. So like, is it gonna be a bottle episode again, or is it gonna follow this line of historical in continuity that he's going with? I don't think it's gonna work well.
The Irish Times, before this episode, is kind of the major publication that said, by the way, they don't mention Northern Ireland at all.
Yeah, we'll link to that as well.
The internet was like, I'm sorry, what? And we have there's a part of me that I don't want him to deal with it because he's going to do it poorly.
If he was going to deal with it now and he didn't, do I want his hot take on the hunger strikes? Probably not.
But it just feels incongruous to not even have mentions.
Yeah.
And so like there are ways to have it like just as a conversation with Wilson, like just it's like it's Chekhov's gun. Like he's gonna have to fire Chekhov's gun in Act 3, and we're in the middle of Act 2, and he hasn't even put it on the wall.
And there's no gun. Yeah.
And there's no gun, and so I don't know quite how that's gonna feel. And to me, that's gonna be even worse.
Yeah.
And fall into even worse racist stereotypes, which. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. What Peter Morgan has shown me so far is that he probably has some negative feelings about Northern Irish folks. And it wouldn't surprise me if he does. And that would be one of the reasons he doesn't want to touch it.
Yeah.
And I could be very, very wrong. And if somebody is personal friends with Mr. Morgan, I would love to be corrected. But his creative output so far has shown that there's not a lot of focus or empathy on the island, province, country, whatever.
Yeah.
And he is certainly covering a lot of people who have feelings about Catholics in Northern Ireland. So there's a lot of real mess here.
It feels like a very, like that he's portraying a very English Britishness.
Correct. This is not at no point in time, except for, and I'll argue even within the Welsh episode, that he is interested in talking about the United Kingdoms of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. He's barely interested in talking about Britain, which is England and Wales.
And Scotland.
Not interested in Great Britain, which is England, Wales, and Scotland. And not interested in the United Kingdom, which is all four. Yeah. So it's...
Yeah, because even the Welsh disaster in Aberfan, the slurry incident, was the best episode of the season for my money and told brilliantly. It was, again, as you say, a bottle episode. But even in and I don't know the Welsh name of the episode, but the investiture episode, it's the perspective on Welsh nationalism. They do give us a Welsh protagonist who is an avid nationalist and who has problems with Charles and the investiture.
But it would surprise me that he didn't also know that there were Scottish nationalists and Irish nationalists.
Irish nationalists, yeah.
Like that gentleman, I believe, that gentleman's an amalgamation of a lot of people, if I remember correctly.
He was an actual historical character.
Okay, sorry.
That was his tutor, his Welsh tutor was that man, and that man was an avowed nationalist.
I stand corrected. It would really surprise me if he didn't know who John Hume was, who was the leader of the Northern Irish nationalism movement and civil rights movement for Catholics in Northern Ireland. It would just surprise me. Like, the Royal Mail was delivered between Northern Ireland and England and Wales at that time. So it even just a throwaway line in that episode looking at Charles and going, and we're not the only ones.
Yeah.
Like, you're gonna have Scottish problems on your hands, and you already have Irish ones. Like, done. That would have just told me that somebody did a Google search.
Yeah, and I mean that's like the historical incontinuity is one of the bigger problems that we have with the overall season as well. That these lines weren't followed through, and the things that were focused on historically were a lot of times manipulated.
Yeah,
a lot of times flipped around in chronological order, which happens and can be useful in shows, but we don't think it was done well. But I think a lot of this portends for my skepticism for season 4. But I'm curious, Dr. Kristen, what else do you think we're gonna see, or what else do you hope to see in season 4 besides maybe some recognition of Northern Ireland or not?
I don't know how I feel at this point. I don't know how I feel.
Me neither.
If they cast, I will say this. If we get any casting news in the next little bit and any of them are Northern Irish people, that's going to be, we might come back with a beep, 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 beep special report, because that's like not Northern Irish actors, but like Northern Irish historical figures.
If they cast Jerry Adams and John Hume, because presumably...
If they cast Ian Paisley, I will lose my living mind.
Oh, could you imagine?
Oh, could you imagine?
Presumably this will cover,
like 78 to 88, probably.
88. This season covered technically 14 years, so we could go into the 90s if Peter Morgan.
I mean, they could end it with the first ceasefire if you wanted to.
They could go all the way to the ceasefires in 1994 if they wanted to, which would be a lot.
I think realistically, we're going to have to talk about
Sorry, say that again. You broke up a little bit.
It's okay. Terrible internet here today. I think we're going to talk about the miners' strike in '84, the prolonged miners' strike.
Oh, yeah, the Welsh miners' strike.
The Welsh miners' strike. That there can also be room in this period to talk about the increasing pressure on the government to decriminalize homosexuality.
Yeah.
Which could be a very Peter Morgan episode. I have absolutely no idea what Margaret was up to in the 80s, so who knows where we're going to get Margaret in this.
We're
going to get Diana.
Obviously, we're getting the wedding, the fairy tale wedding, Charles and Diana. We're getting the continuation of the saga of Camilla Parker Bowles and Andrew Parker Bowles and Diana. We know they've cast Diana.
And the birth of the boys, because that both happens in the 80s. Because
that happens in the 80s, yeah. I saw a picture the other day from set where they were, it was Charles and Diana's visit to Australia.
Okay. So I wonder if we're going to open with the wedding and close with a divorce.
Ooh. When did the divorce happen? I don't know.
Well, before she died. And didn't she die in 98?
I'm going to ask Google right now.
So here's how my math is working. I think Harry and my brother are the same age. I think they were both born in 86, and Harry was 12 at the funeral, as we have learned, as he has said many times in the last couple of weeks, as explaining as to why he is turning down his Royal Highness title.
Diana divorce. 1996.
So ostensibly, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, they were married for like 15, 16 years.
And they were separated well before the divorce, so they could go marriage to separation.
They could go marriage to separation. I mean, narratively, like that would be the bookends I would do personally.
And it would appear that those are the bookends he's probably setting up, because the last couple episodes did deal a lot with Charles's romantic entanglements.
Anjana. So that, I want to see, I mean, so for anyone who doesn't know the history of the 80s in the UK and people's strong feelings about Margaret Thatcher, she also had some real strong actions around providing milk for children at school, and there was some strikes around that. I'd like to see some conversation about that.
They'll have to cover the milk strike, you'd think.
But
I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm skeptical, I'm nervous, and I'm not generally excited.
So here's the deal. I have stopped loving the show.
Yes.
I am not yet just tolerating it, but I am rapidly approaching that point, because even the clothes porn is not enough to keep me happy. Like Brooch Watch was not
great this season.
And
were terrible. I understand it was historically accurate, but those hats were gross.
May the Lord forgive us for the 1970s. You know what I mean? So,
and 80s fashion, like,
it's not a whole heck of a lot better.
I don't know anything about what Queen Elizabeth wore in the 80s, but I can imagine it's not pretty, y'all.
I mean, it's lusciously shot. It's gorgeous. It makes me homesick. Like all of those things. Anything I watch where there is, accents from anywhere on the British Isles makes me homesick. So, for that life. But you guys are who I'm going to watch this for. So please.
We will be covering season 4. They're currently filming now. So possibly, again, the end of year. They seem to do kind of the end of year, November, December launches. So we could get it by the end of this year. We don't know. They haven't told us.
We will remain constantly vigilant. Dr. Hinson, is there anything that I didn't say that you are looking forward to and or petrified of?
I don't think so. Yeah, I haven't decided how I feel about Northern Ireland being talked about at all at this stage. I'm still going to be upset about it no matter what he does, I'm sure. The Welsh miners' strike, I think, would be great. If anybody wants to watch a movie, we've talked about it before, about the Welsh miners' strike and the intersection of the fight for LGBTQ rights in the UK and in Britain, please watch the movie Pride. Immediately, right now. It's delightful. No, I think we've covered it. So in terms of the two biggest shows that we talk about, The Crown and The Handmaid's Tale, we are awaiting both of the 4th seasons of those shows. So what will we talk about in the interim, everybody?
Fantastic question.
Up next.
So the good news is, if you love our depressing coverage, boy, do we have a treat for you.
Oh boy, look out, kids.
So you may have heard of a case. You probably haven't heard of the case, let's be honest. But if you are a pop culture person, you may have heard of the Netflix series called Unbelievable, which is the Netflix account dramatization of a real life series of cases on the West Coast, both in Colorado or Western Coast. I know I can't call Colorado the West Coast. Aaron's soul just like twitched.
Out west.
And in Oregon. Of essentially of the rape of a young woman who was this is all going to happen in the first episode, but it's also the premise of the show, who was due to police manipulation forced to recant her accusation of rape against a stranger.
Yes.
And the ramifications of that recanting. It is a grueling. We have seen episode 1 and we've read a lot about the rest of the episodes. It is a grueling look at the way sexual assault is handled in this country legally. And I already on episode 1 wholeheartedly both recommend it and warn you about it.
Yeah.
Just the first 20 minutes of episode 1 is already in my canon of required viewing for humans to understand what a sexual assault exam is like for survivors.
And and what survivors and victims of sexual assault go through in both the exam and the questioning from police, the treatment, like what happens when you report a crime of sexual assault to your person, to your brain, to your life. Like, watch episode 1.
So we'll be talking about that, and then we'll lighten it up and talk about some fun documentaries or one-off comedy specials or something, we promise. And then we've got a couple other things in the pike. As always, though, if you've been watching something that you think we should be, hit us up in the comment section or shoot us an email that you can find on our website.
Please do. We are always here for recommendations. Look out for our Unbelievable coverage with episode 1 starting next week. I think that's everything that we've got for season 3 of The Crown. Thanks for sticking with us, if you indeed did, through this season and thus far. And we'll see you all, if not for season 4 of The Crown, then somewhere along the way.
Have a great year until we see you again potentially, or a great week until you start joining us for Unbelievable. Bye, guys.
Bye.